a whole group of people here. Tziporah, Serota is an undergraduate in my lab. And all the rest are different individuals from different public gardens in the Midwestern United States. This will make sense in a moment. So this should look very familiar to everyone. This is a typical pattern of invasion of non-native species into a new area. So over time, essentially, you have an introduction point. The populations grow and expand, eventually costing a lot of money in terms of management and control as the areas that are infested by those individual plants expands as well. So if we think about this from a management perspective, there are various points at which we can try to reduce the impact of these invasive species. So obviously prevention, you can prevent something from being coming into an area. So the two talks after mine look at ports of entry, for example. As the populations grow, you can that might be a good time. If they're small enough, you can try to quickly eradicate them. And then as the populations continue, ultimately you can't really eradicate them, you can try to contain it, and then eventually over time you're sort of just left with basic management. What I was interested in, and the rest of my talk is going to be talking about, is really looking at this introduction point and the early stages of spread. It's also very important to point out that not every single introduced species is going to become invasive. It's really only actually a very small number of introduced species, known as the law of tens, if you're familiar with that, that actually will become invasive. So that's important to point out. Now, those that do become invasive, as was already referred to in this session, is that there's oftentimes various traits that are associated with invasiveness. And I got to become really interested in this because I'm also a gardener. And it turns out that a lot of these traits associated with invasiveness are also the same things that are desired in horticulture. So the public gardens and gardeners in general, they want plants that they can't kill. Right? So you want wide ecological tolerance, you want hardy plants. A lot of gardeners, they want something that's going to grow really fast. You want that big tree that's going to grow in 5 years. Don't tell me it's ridiculous. You want something that looks pretty. A lot of flowering. Some people really want to nurture wildlife, so they want something that has high food production. And then another typical characteristic associated with invasiveness is multiple introductions. And you might know about this. Oftentimes a single introduction of a plant or animal doesn't really take. You have to keep doing it over time, and then eventually it works. And I was interested in the concept of multiple introductions because if you think about it via horticulture, we have multiple introductions of a given plant, sometimes across North America, through the ornamental pathway. You can have the same cultivar being introduced in Ohio, where I'm at, California, where I'm from originally, all over the place. So in fact, this isn't a new idea. We do know that horticulture can be a pathway of invasive plants. And Sarah Ricard, in her dissertation back in '94, was the first really to quantify this. And so she looked at woody invasive plants across North America, the US, and what she found at that time is 82% of them had some history of being used for landscaping in their past or their current role. And so we know that. Another one is Tiffany Knight wrote a really nice paper with Kate Havens and Patty Vitt in Bioscience in 2011 showing that cultivars can be part of this problem as well. Even if they have very small, limited seed production, they still can get out into the wild. So we were thinking about this, Tziporah and I, and we decided that we wanted to update Sarah's really great 1994 review because we've had a lot, time has passed, we've had a lot of species coming in still. Of course, it's always going to continue, and so there's Tziporah. So what we also decided to do was we wanted to expand beyond just woody plants. We increased the categories, so we had woody, we had herbaceous, and then we also pulled out vines as separate. If you've ever been involved in species assessment, invasive species assessments, vines are sort of weird. So they're sort of off in their own category. And then because we had increased the number of types of plants, we couldn't do the entire United States, so we decided we were just going to focus on the Midwestern US. And how we did that was we took 295 species that were listed as invasive by the Midwest Invasive Plant Network. And you can see the 8 different states that are located there. So these were species that were on either regulated actively by the states or just on their informational invasive species lists. And so for each of those species, what we did was then we looked at the literature and different resources, and we tried to determine the origin of that plant. How and why was it introduced into the United States, or rather the Midwestern United States? And it turned out that the origin could be split into accidental and intentional. This is nothing new. But then what we did within the intentional, we then separated it out into ornamental, which is sort of what I was really interested in. Whether it was introduced for an agricultural use, for culinary to eat or medicinal, and then aquarium, because some of these are aquatic, so they have an aquarium introduction for the aquarium trade, and then some of these were introduced for soil control to reduce erosion. So what we then did was we had these different categories. So color-coded, for those of you in the back, what I'm going to be focusing on is purple. Purple is ornamental. And so the first thing that we found out was, not unexpectedly, but the proportions are pretty high, is that most plants, regardless of the type of plant, woody, herbaceous, or vine, most were introduced intentionally. And so actually 94% of woody plants had an intentional introduction. Herbaceous, 52, we sort of know this, a lot of herbaceous are accidentally introduced, and then vines had 70%. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you a graph of each of these categories. So here we have the percentage of woody taxa. We have in this first category here, intentional, accidental, and we had a few little unknowns. It was very difficult to find out. So here, what I'm showing you is, again, 94% of all of this was intentional, but if you look within the intentional category, we had a few species that were introduced for erosion control, but overall, 89% of all introductions of woodies were for an ornamental purpose. So if you do exactly the same thing, and to compare this to Sarah, again, just as a reminder, she had 82%, so slight increase. For vines, it's the same type of story, but here 65% of the vines, in general, if we look at the whole group of vines, 65% of all the introductions were for ornamental, intentional purposes. And then, finally, if we look at herbaceous, then I first want to point out that the range of the y-axis is different here. This is always 0 to 100. Here it's 0 to 60. And we did this just so you can better see what is involved there in the intentional category. But here, 31% of all introductions were for ornamental, intentional purposes for the herbaceous plants. So that's sort of what we're looking at here. So again, just an update to Sarah's original work. So then the question is, okay, let's talk more about those ornamental species. How did they get here? There's various means, and that's where the Night et al. Paper talks about various methods that they got here. And so it turns out that gardens around the world do feature plants that come in. And I got interested in this because a lot of the work that I do with the calorie repair, I ended up going around to different gardens talking about it. And while I was there, I was asking the garden folks, you know, what are other plants that are problematic? And they kept saying amber cork tree. And I go to the next garden and say amber cork tree. And it wasn't even on my radar. So it was like, okay, do you guys talk to each other? And the answer was not really. So I was thinking, wow, there's all this great information that's there, that's available in these gardens. And if you think about it, botanical gardens and arboretum actually are ideal for looking at these questions. So they have curated living collections, they have staff, land managers, taxonomists, all these people here who have this knowledge. Oftentimes they have natural areas within their properties, and so we can have some species escaping over into there. And a lot of, well, always, the accessions are labeled, they're monitored over time, I mean, actual trees and living collections are tagged. So this becomes a really great historical repository. A lot of these gardens also have their own herbaria. And so here's an example, again, getting back to amber cork tree. This is from the Morton Arboretum, and so back in 1987, they have a collection of this thing. And what they said is it's in this one area of Morton Arboretum, they know exactly which area, growing spontaneously as a vigorous weed, forming a large weed patch along a small creek. Note, this is a common and vigorous weed throughout the Arboretum. Back in 1987, they had an inkling that this thing is going to be a problem. If we go to Dawes Arboretum in Ohio, they also have a sample. Look at that one's fruity. And so here they have, it's in a thicket, fruit's blackish, and this is from 2009. So that's when it's starting to rise up there. So you can start to think about all these different gardens, and okay, when were they, or have they even, started to look at this thing? So, yeah, so that's what, this is valuable information. Then when you ask the gardens more, it turns out that many of them, they have lists of problematic plants that, again, they don't share so much. And many of them are actually removing species that they've identified as being a problem. So we did a 2016 survey of public gardens across North America, and then Australia hopped in there. They found out about it. And it turned out that 65% of the respondent gardens do say that they actively remove non-native species that spread from the site of planting. So over half, 65%. This is just an example of one garden where they were like, hey, yeah, we have data. So here's over years, starting from 1988 to 2015. This is the number of de-accessioned or removed specimens per year due to invasiveness. So you can see, you know, some of them, I don't know why there's a dip there, but there is. And that's what we have. So here's a good example. Here's burning bush. This is originally a planting that they had. They tore it out and installed a non-invasive one. This garden in particular actually didn't hide it. This is Dawes Arboretum, and they actually went onto the news. There was a newspaper article about this, saying, hey, look, we have made a decision to remove this beautiful plant. So what we wanted to do is go ahead and create a platform, a program, a way that gardens can share this information with one another. And so we have a working group called the Public Gardens of Sentinels Against Invasive Plants. I think I'm the only academic on the group. Most of it is made of garden personnel across North America. And so what we're doing is we're creating an online platform, again, for the gardens to share this information. And then gardens found out about this, and they said, well, actually, we don't have a list. How do you make the list? So then we had to backtrack. And so now we've developed a set of guidelines that will be released, hopefully next week, to help gardens develop their own lists and start tracking these plants. And so what I'm going to present here in the last few minutes is what I wanted to do is when we started the platform, I needed to get a handle of, okay, what do we need to ask the gardens to contribute? So I put out a call and I asked gardens, can you just send me your lists of what you have? And I just want to compare them. And so 7 gardens said, sure, here's our list. And so, as you can see, it's sort of focused in the Midwestern U.S. and then Canadian garden hopped on board too. So it's like right all here. So this is based on historical and current collections information in these gardens. And so again, they just provided lists of if they had invasive plants. Some of them had like a watch list, and others had plants that they've actually been removing. So it's pretty variable. So here's the results. It turned out that across those 7 gardens, there were 736 species or cultivars. Some of them just had the species, other ones had distinct cultivars that they were either removing or watching. And so these are all the ones that have risen to a level of it's a problem. And so some, again, listed only the ornamentals. Others, it turns out, had thrown in recognized invasives, so the big bad ones, so this like garlic western and things like that. And it threw me for a while. I'm like, well, that's not an ornamental. And then it turns out, well, this is still valuable information, right? So many of these species were found within natural areas, or they could be within the garden itself, spreading, from one bed to another within the collection. And here's Morton Arboretum right there. And it's not always clear if the species is originating from the collection. And it also turns out gardens collect different data. So right now we're trying to figure out how to standardize that. So what is that, 1 minute? We're gonna go fast. So here we go. Across all 7 gardens, there's one species that was a problem. The burning bush. 6 gardens, we had 8 species. Japanese honeysuckle, amber honeysuckle, both common buckthorn, glossy buckthorn, Japanese barberry, Norway maple, amber cork tree, which is really cool because it has a male. They're dioecious. They got rid of the females. The males there, they have a branch that suddenly will start producing fruits, and no one knows why. Whoa. Ornamental, Asian bittersweet, and that's it. Okay, 5 gardens, 12 species. We have Laniceras, sweet autumn clematis, calorie pear, my little baby, amber maple, winter creeper is popping up, English ivy is popping up, white mulberry, tree of heaven, which everyone knows about, multicolored rose, amber pepper vine, black alder, common privet. 4 gardens, we have 36 species. I'll just point out that Chinese wisteria mating grass, which is what we're working on. I'm trying to read. Bigger, minor. 3 gardens, I just want to point out there's a bunch. Golden rain tree is one that popped up. Japanese stovegrass, that's no deal. And then viburnum has been popping up like crazy. In 2 gardens we have magnolias, butterfly bush has popped up, common pear. And in 1 garden we have a lot of different ones, crab apples, rose of Sharon, so different things like that. This is work that we are currently writing up for publication, and we'll have it out pretty soon. So in conclusion, we essentially have a lot of non-native invasive species were introduced intentionally. We already said that. Most introductions appear to be for ornamental purposes. And again, the point that I'm trying to make here is that public gardens can indeed act as sentinels of plant invasion. So many plants have been identified as problematic, but we really need to share that information among gardens. I'm done.